Lost Potential is a series I've wanted to start since the beginning of my channel, and I have been debating on whether or not to go through with it since it is a little taboo of writers to criticize other writers when, in reality, we could all do better. I want to preface this series by saying I know I'm also a mess. I know my books will have issues I'm sure people will only be too happy to punch me in the face with. The frustration with me and books and movies today is the idea that it is too late to criticize something with the phrase, if only it could have been better. But it's true. Lately, books and movies feel incomplete. Some are just a copy and paste of other material that's just trending, and others seem to have gone through the painstaking process of being written, but they just couldn't quite get it. And I know what that's like. No matter how much I put into this series, I know there will be problems. There will be holes, and I don't want other writers who see my videos or their books in my videos to get too disheartened. But us writers on the outside can learn how to better analyze story structures so we can apply these same methods to our stories and practice venturing down different avenues in order to make our stories great. So let's get started.
Listen to me when I say they will never go away. Run. Welcome to the jungle.
Let me start by saying that I loved this movie. I loved the first movie. Venom has always been my favorite anti-hero, and even though his characters aren't as faithful to the comic books, for a vigilante adaptation, I think they did a pretty good job. I thought the sequel had a good thing going. They have good character choices, a decent dialogue, and Venom is funny as shit. That being said, I couldn't help but feel the sequel could have been a tad better. I may have read a few comic books, but I haven't read them all, so I'm not as familiar with Carnage or Shriek. In fact, I've only ever seen Carnage on the covers, and I've heard how over-the-top maniacal this arch nemesis is, but from what I had heard, Carnage is like the ultimate, at least in symbiote regards, and I couldn't help but feel that the creators of this movie downplayed his role by like a lot. When I first watched the trailer, I was beyond excited. More excited than I was to see Dune or Eternals. Venom was never a hero, but more or less a villain. As one of Spider-Man's tougher enemies, it's made clear this symbiote isn't just a caricature of some ordinary bad guy. He brings out the worst in people, enlightening them to their dark side. While the first movie doesn't make him a villain either, the sequel debunks what most viewers had already come to assume, that he was being turned into a sort of vigilante to make the streets a better place, while at the same time eating brains for breakfast. And the movie sets up this internal conflict, not just with Eddie and his demons, but Venom and his primal instincts as well. They have assigned themselves rules to live by. Eddie has made it clear Venom isn't to kill anyone, not even bad guys, and Venom lives by these rules because if he doesn't, he will die. Which is a little shocking considering the end clip of the first movie.
On second thought,
Eddie? What was that?
Oh, I have a parasite.
But realistically, this is the smarter move on Eddie's part. Cops are wondering why these headless bodies keep popping up, and one detective is already sniffing his trail after his interview with one serial killer that goes by the name of Cletus Cassidy. We find out Eddie also has lost his girlfriend because of his impulses, and he continues to struggle to gain more control of himself. If anything, he blames Venom. But while Venom is consoling Eddie, he receives a postcard in the mail from Cassidy. Now, earlier we were set up with this interview where Cletus gave him a haiku to print, and Venom took a peek into his crazy wall drawings to piece together a scene where the bodies would be buried. Cletus has been exposed and is put back on death row, but he makes a final request to see Eddie. He manages to grab hold of him, bite his wrist, and Eddie's blood having mixed with the symbiote is a delightful treat to Cletus. In fact, that tiny drop of human/alien matter ends up being his ticket out. I was more than a little excited at the idea of a serial killer combining with a symbiote for more than one reason. Obviously, it would be interesting to see how it would turn out to see one symbiote given free reign while the other, in comparison, is being restrained. But it would be interesting also to see how the two would function side by side with the different mentalities of their hosts. Cletus and Eddie are both as different as can be, and the symbiosis of both could only prove the differences in these alien parties as well. What makes them tick? What do they most desire? Is food really their only goal in mind, or are they capable of having ulterior motives like humans? There was definitely a lot to play with, and the theme of this movie couldn't be more clear. What happens when we give into all of our impulses, our selfish desires? Would it make make us happy? Would it destroy us? How far could we take it before it destroys the whole world? I think the reason I was most excited for Carnage is that the idea that he really would want carnage. Personally, I think it's a lot more disturbing when a person or animal just kills for fun rather than a motive like revenge, self-defense, anger, or food. This movie had all the potential to dive deeper into the primal, animalistic tendencies that make up the darkest part of the human psyche. People can be most curious about the unknown and the darker side of humanity that a lot of us seem to deny. We are baffled at the apathy, the social misconduct, the absolute heartlessness of some of these people, and at the same time, we wonder, how could a person do that? How could they be capable of doing that? Maybe they were born with a mental disorder, or maybe they just snapped. And I think there are plenty of people who fear that one day they will become the same. There's a lot we don't understand about ourselves, and even less we know about others. What is that final thing that pushes one over the edge to insanity? For Cletus Cassidy, it was abuse. He was born into a world that immediately taught him about hate. He was unwelcome, unwanted, and punished for just being alive, which caused him to lash out to said abusers by ending their lives. He was taught human life is worthless, useless, and pointless. In the movie, Carnage comes out to play during his execution. After a quick killing spree in what one symbiote might call a buffet, Cletus takes back control long enough to make a deal with this symbiote. They are both on the hunt for their opposite. But first, a quick break-in to rescue Cletus' girlfriend Shriek, who was originally signaled with his previous haiku. The main focal point of the movie isn't necessarily carnage, it's a wedding. A red wedding. Okay, fine. An interesting concept. But the carnage is kind of cut short after their escape from Ravencroft, which was the asylum holding Shriek hostage, and then it jumps straight to this idea of a wedding. The Cletus Cassidy of before might not be one for planning, but because of blood sacrifice, the three partners each choose to kidnap and kill their main enemies at the ceremony. Maybe Cletus is one for planning, but the idea of carnage would suggest this might be the first break in his symbiosis. Near the end of the movie, Carnage refers to Venom as father, which might only be somewhat true since it is a minuscule piece of himself that Venom is facing, but since this is Venom, would this mean the symbiote would actually be able to connect with Cletus? He is made of Venom and Eddie's blood, so if he's actually the spawn, how do you explain this sudden loathing? Carnage acts like Venom is some deadbeat dad who took off without so much as a goodbye. Is he just the bitter part of Venom, angry at only ever eating chickens every day? It's insinuated that Carnage has already gone on enough of a killing spree, but can Ravencroft even count? There's still a motive, and both he and Cletus escaped Ravencroft and the prison relatively easily without even having to use 20% of their power. This was supposed to be the moment where we find out just what Carnage and Cletus are made from, what they are capable of, and how they operate. Having Shriek end his spree with her scream would be the perfect way to end the scene, since it also reveals their weakness and how the two react to it. But everything just felt too easy. Uplifting the car in a net of symbiote was cool and all, but how much damage did these two all-powerful villains really do if they were so quick to leave the scene of the crime? Twice! Carnage and Cassidy should be completely symbiotic if we're talking operations, but it doesn't make sense that they share the same mindset about their enemies. I don't understand what Carnage has against Venom since they've never met, but Carnage being all about carnage would suggest he isn't one for planning anyway. He kills first, talks later. Monologuing is fine, it's a cliche I'm used to, but if we're still going to keep with the theme of the movie being that of impulse versus control, I think these villains aren't exactly acting like the opposites you want to contrast against Eddie and Venom, where we could see the comparison through which they would also learn that in this world, rules keep you safe, at least for a little while. Chaos is anything but organized, unless you're the one behind the scenes pulling the strings just so you can let it all go to hell later. These two plan everything. It would be fine if this were how we were introduced to these characters, but when we see how they operate, it's like watching two completely different characters from where we started. We've come to expect something that you told us to expect, but everything that we are seeing on screen is directly contradicting the very thing that you're telling us is going to happen. The word carnage literally translates to the killing of a large number of people. And again, aside from the wardens Carnage kills in prison and in Ravencroft, we don't see a lot of what the main villain's names is supposed to represent. I'm not saying you had to destroy the whole city, but Carnage walks out of the prison almost immediately after he's escaped, only killing the very people who are trying to stand in his way. This is visually represented by how fast the prisoners scurry away when he roars, flashing us to the next charge into the street and remorphing into Cletus. And for a red wedding, 3 people is not Carnage. But the movie is not faithful to its name. Cassidy has a complete disregard for everyone save his girlfriend. He was abused by family, by superiors, and picked on by anyone who was his equal. He had the perfect setup to be the monster that Venom should have feared, because he acts on impulse. This would have even contributed to the fighting style of the monster, since he's newer and younger than Venom. The crazy primal version of an animal versus the smart thinking, self-controlled, disciplined counterpart Venom has already proven to be, even when he doesn't like it. Cletus was the perfect antidote for Eddie's behavioral problems. His girlfriend accuses him of only thinking about himself, being impulsive and irrational and selfish. Cletus is just like that, and Eddie had the chance to see what extreme this impulsiveness can take a person when they're not careful, and how it does hurt others, creating more conflict for his internal demons when he realizes the problem isn't Venom. Another issue was the character known as Shriek. She's all for the murder of innocents until, I don't know, Carnage goes after Annie? Like, what? You helped kidnap the girl, locked her in a coffin, and now you're going to tell him to stop after you just murdered a cop? But why is this moment her breaking point? If anything, she should have seen or heard something to realize that as long as Carnage is present, even she isn't safe. We could have kept all the scenes of Cletus being tender with her and then Carnage losing his temper. But here we should have made her see that even though Cletus loves her, Carnage does not. And as long as Carnage holds the reins, Cletus has zero control. That would be her moment to say, this has to stop. Followed by her death, not by Venom, but Carnage. These two should have had an epic battle, short but sweet, as Cletus struggles against his symbiote, now attempting to hurt the love of his life. Following that, the symbiosis breaks. This would be the moment Cletus realizes Carnage doesn't care about anybody, even the love of his life. And while Cletus fights against him, enraged at the monster he's become, this moment would be the perfect moment for a weak, possibly defeated Venom to rise up and finish this. There are themes present throughout the movie that are just brushed off and dismissed, and everything that's been building up to a climax has been thrown away for a quick last-minute push just so Venom can win by miracle rather than design. I realize this movie isn't necessarily a direct Marvel movie, and for that I'm kind of glad. Disney is ruining everything else, let me have this. But I still left the theater feeling pretty average. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. I'll see you all next time.